My name is Sakena Walji, and I'm the Director of CILT, Centre of Innovation in Learning and Teaching in CHED. I also coordinate an institutional working group, which is looking at emerging issues with AI in education. And with the support of that group and with CILT's own AI working group, we are engaged in a range of activities, including developing guidelines, brokering conversations, offering workshops, and generally building awareness around the implications of generative AI in teaching and learning at UCT. And the intention generally, and of this panel today, is to bring together people across UCT working in different contexts to share their experiences and perspectives as part of a community of learning. Also just to say that if your particular questions aren't answered or that we didn't finish a conversation, please do get in touch with us or with me, and we'll do something about it. Okay, so today's topic is to discuss the challenges with AI detection tools and to talk about some of the ethical and practical concerns. And I'll start off straight away by saying that we're having this conversation from kind of two perspectives, I suppose. First, that the availability of tools such as ChatGPT, but also other generative AI, are able to produce responses to writing assignments, produce essays, coding assignments, which students might pass off as their own original work, and this does have serious implications for academic integrity. And then the second perspective is that one response has been the availability of a set of tools which are broadly called AI text detector tools or AI classifiers that purportedly detect if a piece of text or an output is human or AI generated. And of course, if it was an open and shut case and it was easy to do this and we were very sure about it, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. So the purpose today is to be better informed about some of the challenges and some of the very real practical and ethical concerns that are emerging, both in practice and in the literature regarding the use of AI text detectors to determine whether outputs are human or AI generated. And while this is an emerging and fast-moving field with new things happening weekly, it's clear that there are concerns about reliability and the accuracy of these detectors. And so how do we see that and what do we do about that? And in preparing for this session, I've also put together some notes and I will share them in the chat if people want to follow up further links, and I'll pop that into the chat later. But today we have three panelists, and I'm going to briefly introduce them, and I'm going to ask them if they could come on camera while I introduce them, and then we'll sort of get going with the panel discussion. So first of all, I want to introduce Associate Professor Adish Badri. Adish is an Associate Professor in Information Systems at UCT with a research focus on e-commerce, ICT for development, the socioeconomics of technology and data analytics. He's represented South Africa at panel discussions and forums on bodies such as the World Trade Organization. He's presented several keynotes at international universities in India and Germany and various industry bodies. Adish holds a PhD in Information Systems, an MSc in Financial Economics, an MA in Creative Writing, a PG Dip in Higher Education Studies, a BSc Honours in IS, and a BSc Computer Science and Business Information Systems. And he's currently reading an MA in Higher Education Studies. So you probably win the person with most degrees today, Adish. So welcome. We look forward to your perspectives. I'm also delighted to welcome Hanani Shlamani. Hanani, if you could put your camera on. Hanani is welcome, fantastic, is a technology law strategist, legal consultant, and researcher pursuing a PhD in commercial law at UCT. He's a researcher in the Nkato Center for Law and Technology and Research ICT Africa, where he explores the relationship between law and emerging technologies in Africa, focusing on data governance and artificial intelligence. His publications have also made an impact for organizations like the African Union, SADC, the EU, and AERC. He also contributes to publications discussing the opportunities and risks of emerging technologies. So, Hanani, thank you very much for making the time to be with us today. And then very pleased to introduce my colleague, Alicia Ernst-Moulin, who is a learning technologies consultant in CILT. She holds qualifications in anthropology and information systems, and she's currently completing her master's degree in IT. and she also has a love for online gaming. Okay, so thanks very much. So we have asked the panelists, we've sent the panelists a series of questions, and we've asked them to talk to any of those questions from their particular perspectives. And so I'm going to ask Adish, first of all, to start us off. And I think you're going to talk to us a little bit about, like what should we know about these detectors? How do they work? And what are the main sort of challenges and limitations? So over to you, Adish. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Sukaina. Thanks, everyone. Is it okay if I share my screen? I've got a few slides. I was
Yes.
given permission to have just a few, so kept it as short as possible. So, of course, the magic question: can everyone see my screen?
I can see
with a thumb.
Yes.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, so hi everyone. So today we're going to be talking a little bit and discussing more than talking. This is really something, as Sukaina has highlighted, is a pretty nuanced topic in terms of AI detection and the use of AI, particularly within the academic environment. So I've looked at it from that perspective, and I've asked the question about in terms of, well, why do we need it and how does it work? So let's start off with why do we actually need AI detectors? So first and foremost, we know that we are getting more and more powerful intuitive tools like ChatGPT, and there are tons and tons of positive uses. We've seen the role that it plays. I mean, the basis of it is technology is there supposedly, depending on the way you look at it, to make our lives easier. But at the same time, there are restrictions. And so hence the question around the ethical manner in which they're used. So leaders in various industries consider some of these generative AI tools inappropriate and sometimes even a security risk. There's some universities that have actually forbidden their students to use AI tools, which I think is quite a sad loss, because they're not actually realizing the power that they have as a learning tool. So from our side as educators, we can also see them as a threat to the excellence in academics. And this is where the plagiarism question comes in. So what we need to do is we need to try and understand, what are we looking for when we talk about the plagiarism that's inherent within AI tools? And quite importantly, what do we want to do about it? So what is an AI content detector? It uses AI, so it's a little bit cyclical there, to identify text written by a generative AI model such as ChatGPT. So the software aims to provide readers with transparency and ensure that only quality content is published. Now, what do we need to look for? I mean, is it that easy to actually pick up whether something is being generated by AI or whether it's actually written by a student or is new IP? Now, there's a couple of things that were highlighted to say, look, you can actually go and look for it manually, but it's quite difficult. See, the difference is that your AI detectors tend to use low perplexity and burstiness. They actually are quite technical, and I'll go into a little bit of a breakdown as high level as possible, just to understand how they work. But if you were to basically eyeball it, you are looking for things like, submissions. Do they read monotonously? Is there very little variation? Is it quite predictable? Are you seeing, generic word choices? Now, you can also pick up things that an AI detector doesn't necessarily pick up if you're eyeballing. Things like overly polite language. A chatbot, for example, it's built to replace someone sitting in the service industry, like, for example, a call center agent. So it's built to be polite. So overly polite language is a little bit of a red flag there. Hedging language, so a lack of bold original statements, tending to overuse generic hedging phrases. So basically the non-committal type of language, so that because at the end of the day, it's a machine learning tool. So it learns based on the data and information that's it's been fed. So it can't come up with new innovative perspectives itself. So it will hedge its language as much as possible. Inconsistency in voice, because it's drawing from different sources. Unsourced and incorrectly cited claims. This has become a very, very big one, where we're finding more and more often that either resources that are cited are non-existent or actually irrelevant. And logical errors. So you may not find that sort of fluency that you would find if a human being wrote down a piece. So the question is, how do these AI detectors actually work? I've given a 10-step process here, and my source is supposed to be at the bottom, but it's disappeared. But the idea behind it is very much, it uses natural language processing, so your NLP techniques, to identify those patterns, anomalies, and specific elements. Things like what we just saw that you would be eyeballing. However, it's not going to be as intelligent as that,
Yeah,
which is why.
I don't, obviously.
Which is, oh, sorry, I think somebody's unmuted there. So as Sukaina highlighted, it's not a foolproof process, but it also brings up a lot of ethical issues. So how does the process actually work? Like I said, first things first, data collection. So the software collects data from a number of sources, then goes into pre-processing. Now, this is where it pre-processes the data to clean and organize it. It's an old saying of garbage in, garbage out. You need to actually have clean data in order to get a proper output. Feature extraction. Now, features are characteristics and attributes of the data that the model will then use to make predictions. So, for example, word frequencies, the embedding of words, using n-grams. So what are those things, for example, as they say, those repeating words, the sort of hedging language, those type of things that it can identify. Now, the next component is training the model. Remember, we're talking about machine learning. So it's a learning process. So you identify those things that are plagiarized, those things that aren't plagiarized, and the model is learning as you feed it more and more data. So if you look at point 5 there, different AI models are used depending on the task. So common models include your neural networks. So CNNs for image analysis and recurrent neural networks or transformers for natural language processing, and machine learning algorithms. So decision trees. If something happens, move down this way of the tree, versus if something else happens, move that way, and so on to make a final decision. Training and validation. The model is trained on a portion of the data and validated on another. So think of a sample and a control. Basically, what you're doing is you're training it using an X amount of data, and then you're validating. So you're testing it using another set of data to actually see whether it's learned enough to be able to identify has plagiarism occurred or not. Testing and deployment. Okay, so once we're happy that the model is performing pretty well and it has been validated, you then push it out into the real world. So this is where new unseen data is then analyzed. Inference. Okay, so now inference is the real-time use. So the AI model then processes new data and makes predictions and classifications on the fly. So this is now where your software really starts working. So remember that it's already gone through a whole training process, and this is the point that you as the user are now seeing it, or rather you as the educator are now seeing it, where it's working in real time. Post-processing. So after it makes certain predictions, so it believes that this amount, let's say 40% of a specific document is plagiarized, has been built using AI, the software may apply post-processing techniques to then refine its results. Okay, so it processes using further algorithms to say, can it refine its results any better? Can it get that 40% better? Can it actually give you a more accurate reading? And then, of course, finally, a feedback loop. Now, this doesn't happen in all software, but there may be an incorporation so that as you feed it new data, it starts learning more and more, right? So the actual detection tool is working as a learning tool itself. So as you say, actually, you know what, that was not plagiarized, that was done by myself, versus this was plagiarized, it uses that information to learn. So this in a nutshell is how your AI detectors actually work. All the way from data as the main starting point, into training, into actual usage, and then post-usage. So 4 real steps. I think Sukaina has already spoken a little bit about this, particularly in the document that she's given out, but I think you can clearly see it's very different to just a normal plagiarism checker, because what we're looking for here is specific characteristics within the text, right? We're looking for specific red flags to go, okay, this thing has been generated by AI and not written by a student, versus those plagiarism checks are looking at bodies of text to say, has somebody copied and pasted those bodies of text? I pulled this from a very nice list of tools, and I'm happy to share the presentation. But just to give you an idea of the type of tools out there, and there's a lot. I mean, you just Google, top AI detectors, and you're going to land up with lists and lists. Apologies. You're going to land up with lists and lists of different from different perspectives. So here's some of the examples. Winston AI being one of the most powerful, is able to detect using on GPT-3, ChatGPT, GPT-4. So the idea is that as you get newer tools coming out, these tools need to be incorporated into your detection tools. Functionality, basically, for example, this one gives a percentage between 0 and 100, that the odds of the copy was actually written by a human or not. And then, of course, the cost. Very few of them are free. There is a cost implication, and it's something that we need to take into account also as educators. So Kenya has also mentioned the Turnitin AI detection. So instead of going to Juliet, I see a question. Do you mind if I just run through this last bit, and then I'll come to you now? Turnitin, rather than going to the software itself, I actually went to go and look for reviews. And I found some interesting ones. Here's a positive one to say, okay, in this case, the AI detection tool managed to pick up that, yes, this was created by an individual and not by an AI tool. Versus, and in the author's opinion, they used about 30% of it was their own, and about 70% was AI generated, and Turnitin picked it up at around 48% of the document. So as I said, it's not an exact science. And then the question then leads to, well, should you be using it? Shouldn't you be using it? Do you want to use it? So that's in a nutshell. I wanted to keep it as high level as possible. I don't know, Sukaina, should I take questions now, or?
I think maybe if we go through our panelists and then come back to questions that everyone has time. So thanks very much, Adish. That's a really good input. And you mentioned the notes that I'd shared, so I popped them into the chat, which kind of gives more links and things as well if people want to follow that, because we've just got such a lot to get through today. So I'm going to try and, so next, Hanani, do you want to give your perspective, maybe around some of the kind of ethic issues, but really anything you want to say regarding this topic? So over to you. You're on mute.
Oh, wow. 3 years later. Thanks very much. Let me just see if I can share my screen quickly as well. Where is that window? There we go. Please confirm you can see that. Sotaina?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to touch on some of the challenges that I came up with. I think Prophet Disha has probably explained how the technology works from the ground up, so I'm not going to dwell too much on that. But some of the challenges that I have come across and that I've come to note really is the issue that AI detection tools rely on patterns, and that is to say that they do not specifically look at everything holistically, but they're looking out for certain indicators. And this means that at the end of the day, it might, the over reliance of common phrases might end up being an unfair thing, especially to students. Now, one of the problems that we've noted about AI, especially in the generative context, is that recently there have been reports that there's so much AI generated content out there that the AI is no longer learning from humans. And in fact, it is now starting to learn from AI again. So, for lack of a better word, we'd call this inbreeding. AI is starting to inbreed, and the results are becoming more and more atrocious. And so in this particular context, when we're talking about, these common phrases that are being on the lookout for, there's the real possibility that, it's going to end up just detecting each and everything without any kind of nuance or any kind of understanding. And then, of course, there's the problem that the training sets on which most of these AI detection tools are trained upon are human generated. Now, the question there is, to what extent can we then say anything is really AI generated if it is only emulating what humans have done? And so these are some of the questions that a lot of people are struggling with right now to say, if the AI is trained on human creativity, then it detects that human creativity. Do we then call it AI, or is it really human creativity? And so really it's just one of those questions. And I think also, as you rightly pointed out, that there have been a lot of hits and misses, especially when it comes to AI detection tools. Currently, some universities have taken them up, some have dropped them after using them for a small period of time. And of course, this is natural, I guess, because, with the coming of ChatGPT, and, Bing and all these other text generators, there's been a lot of panic. And, within that panic, there's been a lot of, just randomly grabbing whatever tools they can get at their disposal without really necessarily understanding how these tools work or how helpful they will actually be. And so currently at the moment, like a lot of technologists have said, including Google CEO himself, he says that, look, we are just at the beginning of what AI can actually do. And so if we really to look at some of these detection tools that are out there right now, fair enough, some of them are pretty accurate, some of them are really bad, but it's too hit and miss to really call them dependable at the moment. And so, when AI generated content, for instance, is mixed with the human creativity, I think I saw a question in the chat to say, what if I use this for an outline and then I add some of my stuff to it? Just how much of that is it going to detect? In fact, there's one gentleman on Twitter that I do follow. He speaks a lot about AI and these text generators, and he ran some of his work through it. So the first time it comes out, it's 100% positive that this is AI generated. But then what he did was he wrote something that he did not depend on AI at all, but asked the AI to just clean it up, to remove some redundancies and to polish up some words. And it still came back really high. And he says, but none of this was actually generated by AI, right? But the AI was a tool that he used to clean up his writing. And so there's also, a bit of a complex situation there, especially when it comes to using AI as a tool and not using AI to write for you. But also within the university context, of course, there's the issue of mistrust and surveillance amongst the student populace. The real question is, especially to your lecturer, do you not trust me enough, or do you not think I'm brilliant enough to come up with this kind of work that you actually have to run this through some kind of AI detection tool? So maybe just to be a bit careful about that. But in their current iterations, you can look at the limitations of what these AI detection tools have at the moment. And first of all, this is unique to the African situation. We have over 100, and 100 is just really putting it lightly, over 100 languages across the continent. Just here at the University of Cape Town, we have people from all over the continent who are writing in different languages and using different dialects of different languages to, carry out their different work. Now, remember that the AI is only trained based on the data set that it is given. So how effective would it be outside of probably the English medium? But also there's a lack of contextual understanding. The way in which this detection tool deals with a law student or deals with an engineering student cannot possibly be the same. So there's a need for these tools to be a bit more nuanced in terms of their plagiarism detection. And so some of the ethical concerns that I looked at. So first of all, AI detection tools may discourage creativity, right? And this goes back to the question of why exactly are we using AI detection tools, right? Is it really to punish, the student for using this? Or, what really is the reason behind it? And given that they have so many false positives, this could actually just demoralize students who are actually not even using AI. But also, there's the unique situation where AI is now being used for, like I said, paraphrasing or for, checking for redundancies and that kind of thing. And so if every time they get penalized for that, that might just be something that stifles genuine learning and expression. But then also there's the issue of transparency. Not a lot of people actually know how these AI detection models work or how they actually come to that particular conclusion. Now, if we're talking about it in terms of you running a student's work through that, there are privacy concerns as well, right? How do you know that this particular AI detection tool is going to protect the privacy of a student? How do you know that it is actually giving you unbiased opinions when it is giving you that report at the end of the day? But of course, there's the real possibility, especially from kind of the work that I've been doing, is more to do with copyright, right? And that is to say that, first of all, there are implications for copyright infringement on the part of the student in the instance that they just use the AI generators to just do their work. And of course, that in the university context, as we all know, is a big offense. But also, there's the real possibility of running a student's work through these detection tools and having those detection tools then keep that particular student's data and then reuse it without their permission. And so we go back to the issue of transparency, really, to say, do we actually know how these detection tools work? Do we know the underlying algorithms that are being used to train the various tools? And so those are some of the questions that I'd like us to sit with for the moment. I think I'll be back also at a later stage to talk a bit more about balancing the bads and the goods. So I'll just hand over back to you, Sukaina, to take us to the next part.
Thanks. I really appreciate that perspective, Hanani. I'm just conscious of time because we do want a bit of discussion. So Alicia, I'm going to ask you to give your perspective. Thanks.
Thank you, Sukaina. I'm going to start by providing some context as to my opinions on AI detection tools. I apologize for aspects that are repetitive of what has been said by the other panelists, but perhaps it can be seen as more of a reiteration. So as we are all aware, UCT, mostly through our learning management systems, makes use of the plagiarism detection tool called Turnitin. So in April of this year, Turnitin launched an AI detection tool, which was automatically integrated into the Turnitin report system. So as a learning technologist in CILT, a large part of my role consists of responding to queries sent to the CILT help desk. Because the AI detection tool was not optional, it became available to the wider university community, and we were, of course, questioned about the efficacy of this tool. Now, a key point in all of this is that plagiarism detection is more of an exact science, where one set of text is compared to a database of text. It's a one-to-one comparison that brings up a result that can be physically examined. This is item A, just copied from item B. Here are the two sets of text next to each other. AI detection, on the other hand, is more of a guessing game by AI of AI. So it produces results based on likelihood after asking questions such as how predictable is this text and how much variation is there in sentence structure and sentence length. AI-generated text is said to read smoothly and be more predictable in terms of the word that is most likely to follow the last, while human writing is said to contain more creative language choices. Similarly, AI-generated sentences have an average length of 10 to 20 words due to the fact that they have used the simplest, most predictable options, and as such, have even been said to be fairly monotonous. So a few days ago, I read an article on LinkedIn by a company that was sharing their standardized writing style and writing approach that they make use of to write at the same level as a team. I'm just going to read their first 2 points to you. So point 1, write in concise paragraphs. Paragraphs need to be 2 or more sentences, no one-sentence paragraphs, no half-sentence paragraphs, no 10-sentence paragraphs either. Paragraphs need to be 2 to 6 sentences, and each paragraph should make 1 point only. Point 2, sentences should contain no fewer than 10 words and no more than 20. If you are writing a sentence and you get to word 20, stop. The full stop. Use it, it is your friend. The full stop's friend is the comma. The comma's friend is a semicolon or the dash. Make sure you let them hang out. Do not connect a sentence with more than 2 breaks and stick to the 20-word sentence limit. So essentially for me, this is a very structured, patterned approach. And it sounds a lot like what internet sources have described as what AI-generated writing style looks like. Out of interest, I would actually like to run some of this company's writing submissions through AI detection tools to see the outcomes, but alas, I can't. So even though I may not be able to do that, I was able to run my own tests on AI detection tools. So as the detection tool was automatically added onto our existing infrastructure, the first of these that I tested was Turnitin. As mentioned earlier, they launched an AI detection tool within their plagiarism detection tool on the 4th of April in this year. I then accessed ChatGPT and entered the following prompt. Write a 1,000-word essay on the use of ChatGPT in higher education, include a reference list. The saved output was then submitted as an assignment run through Turnitin to be checked against the standard paper repository, but not to be saved in any repository. So then I had some fun and created variations of the submission. I incorporated my own sentences, paragraphs, and headings. And disappointingly at the time, the Turnitin AI detector consistently detected 100% AI-generated text. I thought that maybe this was because of the amount of human-written text that I had entered. It was like it wasn't enough. But I found that another AI detector was able to isolate my paragraphs and sentences. So when I submitted only a paragraph or 2 that was written by me, Turnitin's AI detector gave a result of AI writing detection unavailable, which presumably was due to the fact there wasn't enough content in which to detect patterns and style. So following the above testing, text written entirely by me, a human, was run through Turnitin before submitting that same text with AI paragraphs incorporated. So in summary, the text that was generated entirely by AI was detected to be written by AI by both detection tools that I was testing, and that was great. But where the two differed was that the human paragraph, Turnitin detected that the human paragraph amidst the AI-generated text was also AI-generated, whereas the other detection tool was able to single out the paragraph as written by a human. So my initial advice to others was therefore to only use Turnitin AI detection as a jumping off point. So say that if Turnitin detected AI-generated text, it was best to not take this as full at face value, but to check the text against the secondary detection tool as well. In the same vein, however, like how can one ever feel completely comfortable accusing, for lack of a better word, a student of submitting AI-generated text? More than that, penalizing or even reporting the student, as there is no way to prove definitively that they used AI to generate their text. So as time has passed and AI generating tools have grown more popular and more easily accessible than ever before, so more and more detection tools have popped up. I've run tests on a small fraction of these. I say a small fraction because there are many, as they have fallen onto our radar. Sometimes the department in the university would ask about one, or something about one would pique my interest. For example, there is one in particular that has a visual section as well as a text section and breaks things down accordingly. Regardless, there are always inconsistencies. And now, as is the case with many apps, there is a tendency for users to believe that tools that are paid for are more advanced or more reliable. The truth in this case, however, is that most, if not all, of these detection tools are not reliable because it's not an exact science and there are always inconsistencies. And as soon as one detection tool pops up, 10 tools to bypass AI detection pop up. And students in the higher education sector are making use of these. So I haven't been mentioning the names of the different tools, but I mean, these are easily accessible to anyone with internet access. A quick prompt into any search engine will provide you with lists, with comparisons, with videos of lists and comparisons. But what we need to remember is that it's a cycle of algorithms. The bypass tools are learning the patterns of the detection tools. The detection tools are based on patterns of generating tools, and the generating tools have been created with a source of human text. And so it just continues, it's just cyclical. So unfortunately, at this stage, my opinion is that there is no neat answer to how to detect AI-generated text. And as the practicality of the use of these tools is in question due to their reliability, the ethical question of using AI detection tools for me becomes a big one. Thank you for listening to me.
Thanks very much, Alicia, and to all our panelists. I think there's some really important issues brought up by everyone there from different perspectives. And I wanted to, we've got about 25 minutes. Let's take some questions or comments that perhaps we can start the discussion around that. So any questions? We can start with ones in the chat. While everyone thinks of a question. Cornelis, you had a question? Perhaps I'll read it out and then somebody can come in. So you were asking, if you use ChatGPT to get the basic structure of the essay project, the most important idea is you tweak the essay to read less like a ChatGPT essay. Can it be picked up by the AI detector? I think what you're saying there is what was touched on by some people, that it might be possible to, yeah, it's the combination, I think, of like human and AI. Adish, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, thanks. And I think Hanani makes he'll probably be able to add to this a lot better in terms of copyright. But from a IP perspective, from a human development perspective, it ties in with the question that Adele also asked around, you know, if I have an original idea and I can't eloquently articulate it, can I use ChatGPT? As you say, Sakina, it's a very fine line, because at the end of the day, the idea and the basis of it is still very, very much human. What you're using is the tool to polish it, you know, as you would use any other tool. So if you used Grammarly, for example, to actually polish a document that you're working on, except this is a little bit more intelligent, you know. So tying back in with Cornelius's point to say, but depends on how much you're tweaking, because you could actually ask it to you know, push out a whole lot of facts and then use that and interpret it. And how different is that from what we ask our students to do when we ask them to read 10 journal articles, you know, and interpret it in their own perspective. So there is a fine line there.
Yeah, and I think what we're kind of moving on to is perhaps just picking up on Tony's point that, I mean, I think it's clear that AI detection tools are problematic. Let's sort of, you know, keep that there. But whether, you know, there's bigger issues also around how to acknowledge using AI along with kind of, you know, as part of practices. And as Tony says, the research and writing aid. But Hanani, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, I was just going to add that so some of the work that we've done recently at Research ICT Africa is we had to pitch a few proposed amendments to the current copyright bill, which is being debated currently still being debated internally amongst the people at the National Council of Provinces. And one of the things that we put to them was that, well, there were two angles. So first of all, to allow access to data for AI training, basically saying that, South Africa needs to catch up with the rest of the world in the creation of AI tools, and a lot of copyright laws currently block that access. But also to say that we need to make it certain and unequivocal that humans should not be, AI should not be given copyright over any generated works. So there's a bit of a controversial thing to that because, of course, South Africa is the first country also to grant a patent to a non-human entity, which is, of course, an artificial intelligence thing that they did like 2 years ago or something. And so now there's debate around that. But what we do know currently in terms of the current South African copyright law, when it comes to originality or authorship as it relates to a work, the standard, of course, is the sweat of the brow test, just how much human input was there in the compilation of a specific work. And so proving that, of course, is the main challenge. But of course, we don't know how to do it yet. It's just one of those things that I guess we'll have to wait and see what kinds of tests the courts are going to come up with. Nobody yet has brought up anything, legally at least. But yeah, I just thought I'd add that.
Thank you. Thanks. I see a hand up. I think it is Melissa. Do you want to go ahead, Melissa? You're welcome to come on camera if you like.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not on a device with an embedded camera, but you can just hear me for now. Thank you so much for this. I'm picking up lots of words that I can relate to. I think this issue, Hanani was also speaking about it being quite punitive, and and I'd mentioned earlier, I'm a convener for an online postgraduate diploma program in the Department of Medicine and Health Sciences. So all of my students are studying online, but we also have a broader PGDIP committee, including supervisors for MMeds and PhDs, etc. And I've been in all of these meetings saying, how are we approaching this? What are we doing? And so because I've been the person who's constantly been sort of chatting about it in meetings, they asked me to present something next week. And this has really been instrumental in preparing feedback. I think, I think when you, let me give you an example. So, one of our courses is students have to produce a clinical review. And these are clinicians across the continent. Obviously, it's an academic piece. It requires research and data collection. We have a lot of students who are not English home language or first language speakers. And we found that they really struggle with the notion of paraphrasing. You can give the Harvard referencing guide, you can give heaps of information, but without that practical, we do sometimes get the writing lab in for tutorials and that kind of thing. But they sometimes don't go and read it. And so what we started doing was encouraging the use of, for example, Quillbot. So we even did a little bit of a tutorial. We took some text, and I thought it was fantastic. Facilitators, other lecturers thought it was fantastic. And now, thinking about it, the usage of that, which is actually really a teaching and a learning tool, and we actually see this text translate into something that is paraphrased right before your eyes, that's actually only going to increase the AI score on Turnitin. Which is what one of the panelists mentioned earlier, in that it's just going to raise that score. So I guess to get to the bottom of things, and to try and get away from this punitive view that we have, when you open up that Turnitin similarity index or report, and you have that little AI score underneath, and it says something like 100%, it's very difficult to not notice it. So you're inclined to click on that, and you go, oh, wow, that's 100%. Now, a lot of academics don't know what that means. And some of the staff and student guides that you guys released are fantastic. I've shared them with my colleagues. But I guess the takeaway from this, and I'm confirming if this is the correct takeaway, is that perhaps it's, I think the CILT learning technologist, is it Alicia, was saying that it's just not as reliable as we'd like it to be at this time. you know, there's no neat answer, I think she said. So is the advice to academics to just sort of really gauge more from the, like the original Turnitins that we used to use, which has that repository, which is maybe a little bit more specific? What is the takeaway? What is the advice to academics? You have to actually interpret those similarity reports.
Thanks. And Melissa, maybe I can just come in. So the notes that I've popped into the chat maybe will give some, what I've included in this is some links to emerging empirical research that problematizes and actually shows how in many cases these detectors are not reliable. So if you need sort of more evidence in that sense, but I think what you're saying is the takeaway is that we should not be relying on these tools as the definitive statement as to whether an assignment or an output is AI generated, that we almost need to shift the conversation. I know that is an uncomfortable situation for many people who you know really need to establish whether a student submission is AI generated or not, but a lot of the emerging research and what colleagues have said today is casting significant doubt on whether it's even possible to have a definitive approach. But also, I think, as someone mentioned, the possible harms around false positives. So there's kind of like, I suppose, a few implications which I have noted in the notes. So the prevalence of false positives, where a student might be accused of, or a student submission might come up with saying it is AI generated, and the student in fact did not use AI, and then there's a whole process. And those, if you follow the kind of popular media, almost there's more and more stories of like students in distress who have been flagged and so on because of the kind of single reliance on detector tools. There's also false negatives, which is that one of the papers that I've included that I just read yesterday was saying that they were able to evade a detector by having something generated by ChatGPT and then putting it into Quillbot as a paraphraser. And then, so you had two AIs that then evaded the AI. So I think someone said, that's also there in the environment. And then a third area, which we haven't really talked about, but is that it's a recent study from Stanford suggested that original human-generated text that is written by what is called in the US context, quote, non-native speakers. So writers for whom English is not a first language is disproportionately flagged as AI when it isn't, because it tends to be a little bit more simplistic and formulaic. And so there is this kind of possible harm to particular groups of students if there is a reliance on AI detectors. So I have popped those into the notes if people want to follow that. So I think, Melissa, you're right. This is quite a problematic area. And we're certainly not saying that people should rely on these. In fact, they shouldn't rely on them. To sort of move the conversation as to actually telling students how they can use them and how to cite them. Adish, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Sunena, and yeah, it's a very interesting conversation, and I really like the point that was brought up now by Kende and I hope I pronounced correctly, and Tony, very much around, we should really also be stepping back as academics, as educators, and really think about our pedagogy and think about what we're assessing and how we're assessing and why we're assessing. And the basis of it very much is if you have a tool that can mimic the type of assessment that we have in place for a student, how powerful is that assessment in actually gauging where the student is? So it is a bit of a controversial perspective right now, but it is something that really gets us thinking to go, okay, so yes, there's a tool here, and yes, there's plagiarism, etc. But on the flip side of it, let's look at the root problem as well.
Yeah, thank you. Any other hands up or comments? I'm just looking at the chat. Does someone like to? The chat's become very rich and complicated, so I'm just trying to follow some of the threads. Lisa, do you want to come in about the issue of the tribunal with AI checking reports? I'd be interested to hear your perspective.
Okay, sorry, it's Lisa from Information Systems. So I have sat in the tribunal a few times over the years with Turnitin reports, and I would definitely not go to the tribunal with ChatGPT, but because you just don't have the evidence, you can't explain the algorithm. So I think that is a big concern, and I wonder if anybody has done that and what has been the experience, or what is the tribunal's take on this? It would be nice to hear from them. So that was just my one question. And the other thing is, I have been at a recent conference where it was industry, and they're wanting their staff to use AI. So we do actually need to teach students how to use AI. That's the tool of the future. So we also got to be careful of trying to stop students using it when employers are actually wanting them to. Yeah, well, some are, but more will certainly be, because they're just so much more productive.
Thanks, Lisa. Alicia Adams, do you want, your hand is up?
Yes, my hand is up. I'm actually from the tribunal. I'm Advocate Alicia Adams, a legal counselor at the tribunal. I must be honest, my experience with AI or the detector tools is rather limited. I think we've had a handful of cases come through the tribunal. The only difference is, at that point, when it gets to the tribunal, the lecturer has had a conversation with the student. And usually, so far, all the students admit to using ChatGPT. There's not been any student who has not pleaded guilty. So the real test for me would be when somebody pleads not guilty, and then we need to gather evidence with regards to how do we go about proving that this is actually AI-generated text that the student has submitted as their own work. I think at the moment I'm leaning towards when we have students submitting this work and there's a Turnitin report, I think I'm strongly leaning towards the lecturer giving a report as well to say that we've looked at the students' previous submissions and that the language usage and the way the assignment is structured does not, it looks different. It's not the same. There's a marked difference. There's a fluency, that kind of thing. I think that in support with the Turnitin report could be used as evidence, but I've been dealing with Sam Lee Pan, that's also with CILT. And the fact that this is not an exact science, really it leaves because I need further evidence to take to the tribunal. Okay, so that's what I wanted to add.
Thanks very much, Alicia, for that. Yeah, so again, like with other universities, I think we're grappling with these issues. Just to say, some universities have in fact switched off the Turnitin tool, WITS being one of them. I just had that information yesterday as well, because they're finding that they're considering that the possible harm of false positives outweighs the current advantages. And again, in the notes, I've linked to some other universities and their rationale for that. But I think at the very least, it's clear it might act as a deterrent in some cases, but certainly not a single piece of standalone evidence. Okay, we've got in about 4 minutes. Hanani, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to add that there is a movement that currently, so of course they're the people who say we should just not use AI in the creative writing process at all, right? And then there are those who are saying, look, we need to start moving into the future. And the future for a lot of people is not a robot author, but rather a cyborg author. So that is to say, a human being who is equipped with the finest technological tools to use when they're doing their writing. And so what these people are basically saying is that, look, embrace it. AI is here to stay, and we basically need to start to incorporate it better into our learning outcomes and into our modules, in our various modules. And so the main argument there is maybe we need to start rethinking what it is that we're detecting for, right? So on the one hand, some say, okay, we need to look at the learning outcomes. How does this talk to the learning outcomes, engagement, student satisfaction, and that kind of thing? Of course, there are those who will simply just use the AI to write everything, but in the context of the learning outcomes, it might be something to think about. But also there's those who say we should start citing AI as an author, for instance, in terms of, what's the word I'm looking for? Transparency, right? So instead of just presenting the work as my own, maybe write it out and say this text was generated, 80% of this text was generated by AI. Maybe that's a solution to it. I'm not sure. I don't really have an opinion on that. I think it's there's not a lot of learning that's going to happen in that particular instance. But on the off chance that, for instance, there really is no source for anything of that kind of nature, it might be something to think about. So I'm just planting little seeds. Hopefully somebody else thinks about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the responses more generally to being able to move the conversation away from like surveillance and detection and binary issues is if we are using these tools, either because in a kind of a future where we are forms of cyborg, or picking up on Lisa's point around employability and readiness for the workplace, is to kind of think about sorry, it's just the notes come through. Think about moving that that's where that kind of AI literacy with students needs to come. And I think that's really a kind of more, I suppose, maybe tenable or positive future here, given where we are. I just wanted to pick up on, someone said Adele's question, so maybe that's really the last question we can take. Adele, do you want to come on screen and talk about that? We've got a lot of things in the chat. Okay. Okay. All right. So I think we are on 4 o'clock, so we will we'll stop. I think this is just a start of a kind of quite a interesting, important conversation going forward, but there's sort of many forks around better information and information around the AI detector tools, both uses and limitations, but also moving the conversation around, if we are going to be encouraging students to use the tools, how should we communicate that? How should they be acknowledged and cited until we get to a point maybe years down the line where, I think as Kende said, we don't cite a calculator anymore. So I think this is, these are very interesting, difficult conversations. And I thank you for making the time to have those. As I said, if there are kind of outstanding issues, questions, ideas for new panels and topics, please do get in touch and let us know. I just wanted to ask the panelists to come on screen and just sort of so we can say thank you to them. And yeah, okay. And if there's anything anybody wants to say in the last comment, but I really value the perspectives. And yeah, we have a monthly panel like this, so we'll see you again.